Hi, this is Mr. Evans. This video is going to look at a country as a market or a country as a production location. And really, all of the international trade videos I've been doing so far have been leading up to this one because it's one that gets asked relatively regularly, and it's one that students get confused about. So you might get an extended question about whether a business should move to a particular country, either to sell there or to produce there. Okay, and every time the question gets asked, some students talk about the one that they shouldn't, basically. So, multinational companies, they may sell products in one country, but they actually don't produce there. They're just importing into that market. Or a multinational might go and produce somewhere, but sell nothing there, i.e., they're just using that as a place to manufacture their product. Or maybe it's a service and they've got call centers there, but they're not actually providing any services to customers within that country. Or a multinational company may do both, where they're both manufacturing and selling somewhere. Okay, so country as a market means we're selling there. As a production location, obviously means that we're either producing a physical product there, or we've got some sort of our production operations there. So, for example, a call center is a typical thing that a service provider may outsource to another country. So, it's important that we consider the sort of things that we would think about. Okay, so if the question comes up and it's about a country as a market, somewhere to sell, we want to consider the levels and growth of disposable income. This is a great opportunity to bring in income elasticity of demand. Okay, if I'm selling a normal product, which is a product that demand rises for as incomes go up. This is a great bit of analysis to put into an exam. If you can understand income elasticity of demand, I highly recommend advising it. Okay, you can do a great little chain of argument based on income elasticity of demand for products. Okay, and generally, if I'm selling a normal good, then I'll want to go into a market where there's high growth opportunities because as incomes rise in that country, so will demand for my product. I will want to demand it. Okay, the ease of doing business somewhere. So this is sometimes known as bureaucracy, regulations, deregulations. It's generally easier to do business somewhere where there are a few legal barriers. Okay, and countries work towards making it really easy to do business. No sort of unnecessary bureaucracy, getting forms signed here, getting forms signed there. One of the things about the UK leaving the EU is that lots of exporters to the EU have complained about an increase in bureaucracy, needing to get forms filled in, leading to goods being held up at port. Okay, now that's about importing into the EU from the UK, but often when you start selling in a place, there can be lots of sort of barriers to do that, and governments can either make that easier or not. Okay, the level of infrastructure in an economy. So infrastructure is a really important concept. I would define infrastructure as the systems that make an economy function. So we're talking about gas, water, electricity, broadband. Okay, so if I'm a really high-tech firm that relies on people having smartphone access. All right, lots of developing countries have really great smartphone access, in cities, but do they have that in the rural areas? Okay, what's it like? What are the roads like in the country? What's the transport infrastructure? Okay, so really important concept to get your head around. And if I, in the context of selling, I want to make sure that I can get my goods to market. Like I say, if I'm relying on technology, does the country have that infrastructure in place? All right, political stability. Okay, so political stability is about, do we know what's going to happen with the government? Now, in Western countries, we tend to be biased towards democracies where there's, regular elections, but you could have a perfectly stable political environment where there's no elections. Okay, but the key thing here is predictability. Is there a smooth transition of power between governments? Okay. that makes it easier to do business. The rule of law I've added here, is the rule of law in place? Another institution, so we've got government, the court system here, and the banking system. All of these help to create a sense of political stability, make it easier to do business if they're in place. And if it's easier to do business, it's easier to sell in a country as a market. I know I will be protected by the rule of law as a company. That's much better than a country where these institutions are not in place and where there's not political stability. Finally, the exchange rate. It can actually be beneficial to be selling to a country that's got a really strong exchange rate, because that makes the imports cheap if I'm selling into it. Lots of demand for my imports. And when I convert the revenues that I earn, I get a lot of my own currency. So if I'm selling to a country as a market, it's actually not bad if they've got a very strong exchange rate. What about a country as a production location? So I'm going to consider here the cost of production there. That's wages, raw materials. Can be very attractive to produce in a low wage country. If the raw materials are there, I can reduce my transport costs. The skills and the availability of the workforce are going to affect whether or not, how much recruitment I do there, how much training I'm going to need to give my workforce, etc. Infrastructure, again, transporting my goods around, getting them to port so I can export them out of that economy. Location within a trade block, that might make a country very attractive as a production location. I might move to a country within the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, because that is a country where there's huge levels of disposable income, and once I'm in that trade block, I can trade within the block without with lower tariffs than I would otherwise impose. Right? Governments sometimes provide incentives, so subsidies, tax breaks. Governments can also deregulate. That's a cost of doing business, of course. Regulation, I mentioned that earlier. So all of these government incentives can make it very attractive to go and produce in the country. I've mentioned the ease of doing business and political stability. The natural resources in the country. If I'm a mining company, right, what determines whether I'm going to produce somewhere? Well, it might be the fact that there are the natural resources there that I need. Finally, I'm going to consider the likely return on my investment. A higher return on investment makes a country a much more attractive production location. But if the question comes up, just take a second to read it twice. Make sure you're answering the right way. Are you considering the country as a market, or are you needing to consider a country as a production location?